Welcome to Clandestine Cases, where captivating stories and mysteries come to life. Make sure to subscribe and join us on this exciting journey of suspense and intrigue. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can improve our content. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your feedback means a lot to us. Miss Marple and the Silken Veil of Legacy, Chapter 1. The Mysterious Letter. On a mild grey morning in the little village of Little Bredon, Miss Marple sat comfortably in her snug sitting room, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. The early light filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the worn wooden floor. Outside, the quiet hum of the village beginning its day was gently punctuated by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the cool breeze. Miss Marple, with her ever-observant eyes, regarded the peaceful scene with a quiet satisfaction, fully aware that even the calmest days sometimes concealed the most extraordinary happenings. Just as she was about to return her attention to the daily crossword puzzle, a knock at the door broke her reverie. Opening the door, she found a postal delivery man holding an unusually thick envelope. The envelope, made of heavy paper, with an unremarkable seal, bore a handwriting that was both hasty and fraught with distress. The penmanship, though not the work of a professional calligrapher, carried an earnest urgency that instantly piqued her curiosity. Miss Marple accepted the letter with a polite nod and closed the door behind her, and, retreating to her favorite armchair by the window, Miss Marple carefully broke the seal. As she unfolded the letter, the familiar scent of paper and ink filled the air. The message was brief, yet charged with an emotion that resonated deeply with her well-tuned intuition for trouble. The letter read, "My dear Miss Marple, I fear that what has been declared a suicide is, in truth, a murder. My sister, who was full of life, met an untimely end. I beg you to come and investigate." Her eyes, magnified slightly behind her spectacles, twinkled as she read and reread the words. The measured tone of the letter, combined with the palpable distress in its phrasing, suggested that its author was not merely seeking a resolution to a puzzling event, but was also desperate for the truth to be uncovered. Miss Marple's heart, long attuned to the intricacies of human nature, felt a stirring of both sympathy and the excitement of a challenging mystery. For many years, Miss Marple had enjoyed the quiet routine of village life, rarely venturing far from home unless the call of duty was unmistakable. Yet as she sat there, the promise of a puzzle, a chance to peel back the layers of human deceit and hidden sorrow, was irresistible. She mused over the few details presented, a reported suicide that did not quite fit the mold of its tragic nature, and a sister who believed, against all appearances, that murder was at play. The letter's ambiguity was a familiar friend in her line of work. It reminded her that often what was presented as truth was merely a facade, behind which darker motives lurked. The careful selection of words, the emphasis on her sister being full of life, and the urgent request for intervention, all hinted at a deeper story waiting to be uncovered. Miss Marple's mind, ever analytical and perceptive, began to piece together the possible scenarios with the quiet deliberation of someone who had spent a lifetime observing the human condition. Rising slowly from her armchair, she padded over to the small writing desk cluttered with various letters and photographs, a testament to her long career in quietly unraveling mysteries. Placing the letter gently among her collection of unsolved enigmas, she sat back and contemplated its implications. Each word resonated with a hidden message. Perhaps the sister, in her anguish, sensed inconsistencies in the official narrative. Perhaps there were secrets buried in the family's past that needed to be brought to light. The kettle, having long since ceased its whistle, now sat cooling on the table, its momentary lapse a gentle reminder that time waits for no one. Miss Marple poured herself another cup of tea, the steam rising in delicate curls that danced in the soft morning light. As she sipped the warm liquid, she mentally rehearsed the journey ahead. This investigation would likely lead her into the intricacies of family dynamics, into the subtle shifts of allegiances and the unspoken grievances that often fuel such tragic events. Her eyes drifted once more to the letter, and with a quiet, resolute smile, Miss Marple murmured, "I suppose it's time." It was not merely the call of duty that moved her. It was the deep-seated belief that every life, every lost soul, deserved justice, and every mystery, no matter how well hidden, was meant to be solved. In that moment, the serene tranquility of Little Breton was gently disrupted by the promise of upheaval, a mystery that would soon weave its way into the very fabric of her life. The letter, with its stark message and subtle hints of despair, had set in motion a series of events that Miss Marple could not ignore. And so, with her mind already alert to the clues and red herrings that lay ahead, she began to prepare for the journey to come, knowing full well that beneath the calm exterior of a small village, the human heart was a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be discovered. Thus, the stage was quietly set for another of Miss Marple's adventures, a delicate interplay of truth and deception that would test not only her keen intellect, but also her unfailing belief in the inherent goodness of those who sought justice. Chapter 2. The Grieving Sister. Miss Marple's journey led her through winding lanes and past fields of golden hay until she arrived at a modest, ivy-clad cottage on the outskirts of a sleepy town. The building, with its worn stone facade and a small garden overflowing with late-blooming roses, exuded an air of quiet dignity and hidden sorrow. As she approached the weathered front door, she couldn't help but notice the faint scent of lavender mingling with the autumn air. A small detail that hinted at happier times now long past. Upon knocking, the door creaked open to reveal a woman whose very appearance spoke of profound grief. Mrs. Eleanor Cartwright, as Miss Marple would later learn, possessed a kind yet weary countenance. Her eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed with sadness, betrayed the inner torment of a heart steeped in loss. With a soft, trembling voice, Eleanor welcomed Miss Marple into the humble sitting-room, where the light fell in gentle patches upon faded floral wallpaper and a modest collection of well-worn armchairs. After settling into a well-appointed, albeit simple, armchair, Mrs. Cartwright began to speak in a measured tone that mingled sorrow with disbelief. 2 months passed, she started, her voice wavering like a delicate leaf caught in a spring breeze. My dear sister Lydia, who had finally found happiness in a love marriage, was radiant with joy. I had never seen her so alive, so full of promise. She paused, taking a moment to collect herself, her eyes reflecting the pain of a wound that had not yet begun to heal. Miss Marple listened intently, her gaze fixed on Mrs. Cartwright's trembling hands as they clasped a faded photograph of Lydia, a smiling face that now seemed to belong to a world so distant from the one marked by tragedy. Lydia was always the spirit of the family, Eleanor continued. Her laughter filled every room, and her kindness was as natural as the morning sun. So when word came that she had attempted to take her own life, I was struck dumb with disbelief. The words, spoken with a bitter tang of incredulity, hung heavily in the air. In that moment, Miss Marple's thoughts turned over the stark contradiction in front of her. A woman so full of life could scarcely be imagined as capable of the self-destruction attributed to her. I simply cannot reconcile the vibrant Lydia I knew with the notion of a self-inflicted end, Eleanor murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It is as if a cruel twist of fate has rewritten her destiny, and I am left with a tapestry of lies and half-truths. As the conversation unfolded, Miss Marple took note of every nuance. The slight quiver in Mrs. Cartwright's voice, the way her eyes darted towards a dusty window, as if expecting some unspoken visitor, and the occasional sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. All these small details, observed with quiet intensity, suggested that the grief expressed was genuine, yet it also hinted at secrets that lay just beneath the surface. Mrs. Cartwright's recollection of Lydia's recent happiness painted a vivid picture. A sister brimming with hope and love, embarking on a new chapter, filled with promise. She described the wedding as a modest yet beautiful affair, held in a sunlit garden where laughter and gentle music filled the air. "I remember," Eleanor said, her eyes misting over as she recalled how Lydia's smile outshone the flowers that day. She was radiant, and for a brief, blissful moment, it felt as if nothing could mar her joy. But that joy, so fleeting and fragile, was shattered by an event that defied all reason. With every word, Miss Marple's mind mapped out the unfolding mystery. There was the official narrative, a suicide, declared by the authorities, and then there was the quiet conviction of a loving sister who felt in her bones that something was terribly amiss. "I beg you, Miss Marple," Eleanor pleaded softly. "Believe me when I say that my sister's death was no accident of despair. Something sinister must have happened." The desperation in her tone was unmistakable, a cry for help in the midst of an overwhelming storm of sorrow and suspicion. As the afternoon wore on, the two women sat in a silence punctuated only by the ticking of an ancient clock on the mantelpiece. Miss Marple, ever the careful observer, let the silence speak for itself. It was a silence filled with memories, regrets, and a quiet determination to uncover the hidden truths that lay behind the veil of official reports. The unspoken question lingered in the air. Had Lydia been driven to suicide by some hidden despair? Or was there a darker force at play, a murder cleverly disguised to appear as self-destruction? In that humble sitting room, the lines between truth and deception began to blur. Mrs. Cartwright's heartfelt testimony, laden with grief and fraught with uncertainty, served as the first thread in a tangled web of clues. Miss Marple's mind raced, drawing on years of experience in discerning the subtle signals of human behavior. Each gesture, every pause, added to a growing picture of a tragic event, but was not as straightforward as it might have appeared at first glance. Before bidding farewell, Miss Marple assured Mrs. Cartwright that she would look into the matter with all the care and diligence it deserved. Rising from her chair, Miss Marple offered a gentle smile, a quiet promise that the truth would be pursued, no matter how deeply it was buried. As she stepped back into the crisp afternoon air, the modest cottage receded behind her, leaving her with a heavy heart and an unyielding determination. Thus, as the day drew to a close, Miss Marple's mind was already abuzz with questions, and the haunting image of Lydia's smile lingered in her thoughts. The mystery, it seemed, was not just a matter of public record, but a personal tragedy that demanded resolution, a challenge that Miss Marple was uniquely suited to confront. Chapter 3. A House of Secrets. Miss Marple's next destination was the residence where Lydia had once filled every room with her radiant presence. The Henshaw family home, a sprawling yet unassuming estate on the edge of town, was a study in contrasts, its well-tended gardens and stately facade belying the tension that simmered within its walls. As Miss Marple strolled along the gravel driveway, she couldn't help but notice that even the roses and hedges trimmed with such care seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Upon reaching the imposing front door, Miss Marple was met by a quiet flurry of activity. Inside, the drawing room was elegantly appointed with antique furnishings and family portraits that spoke of generations of carefully preserved honor. The atmosphere was simultaneously refined and stifling, as if the very air carried a weighty charge of unspoken grievances and hidden truths. Her attention was first drawn to the commanding figure of Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw, the formidable mother-in-law. With sharp eyes and a tightly drawn expression, Mrs. Beatrice exuded authority and a preoccupation with maintaining the family's reputation. Her measured gestures and precise diction suggested that she regarded any disruption, especially one as delicate as a death under mysterious circumstances, with utmost seriousness. As she greeted Miss Marple, her politeness was tinged with an imperceptible coolness that hinted at long-held suspicions and a relentless desire to control the narrative. Miss Marple was then introduced to the other members of the household. Mr. Alan Henshaw, the elder son, stood near a window that overlooked the manicured lawn. Although he claimed to work out of town, his presence on the day in question was both unexpected and puzzling. He carried an air of restrained charm, yet his gaze was distant, as if he were perpetually weighing his words against an inner ledger of secrets. The faint set of his jaw and the occasional nervous twitch betrayed more than his calm exterior let on. In stark contrast was Mr. Bernard Henshaw, the younger son and Lydia's husband, whose unease was palpable. His eyes flitted about the room, and his hands fidgeted restlessly, as if searching for something to steady his nerves. Each time the subject of Lydia arose, his voice lowered and his words became measured, suggesting that his grief was intertwined with hidden disquiet. There was an air of vulnerability about him, a quiet admission of inner turmoil that was hard to mask beneath polite smiles. Rounding out the company was Mrs. Elaine Henshaw, Alan's wife, whose casual demeanor and seemingly effortless ease belied a complexity that Miss Marple's discerning eyes quickly noted. Elaine's smile was pleasant, but lacked the warmth one might expect from someone so closely connected to the family tragedy. Instead, it was as if she maintained a careful distance, a protective barrier between herself and the painful realities unfolding around her. Taking her place in an unoccupied armchair in a shadowed corner of the drawing room, Miss Marple began her silent work of observation. She sipped her tea slowly, allowing herself to be enveloped by the subtle interplay of light, sound, and gesture that filled the space. Every detail was a clue, the slight twitch of Mrs. Beatrice's lips as she glanced at a portrait of Lydia, the way Mr. Allen's fingers fiddled with his cufflinks whenever Lydia's death was mentioned, and the rapid, almost imperceptible tapping of Mr. Bernard's fingers on the armrest of a nearby chair. Over the course of the afternoon, polite conversation flowed around her, though the topics were invariably circumscribed by careful restraint. The family spoke warmly of Lydia, the brightness of her laugh, the kindness that had endeared her to so many. And yet, as each memory was shared, Miss Marple detected an undercurrent of regret and unspoken accusation. It was as if every affectionate recollection was tempered by the sorrow of a loss that seemed too abrupt, too inexplicable. As the late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting elongated shadows on the parquet floor, Miss Marple gathered her impressions with methodical precision. She had long mastered the art of reading between the lines of human behavior, and today each subtle gesture and fleeting expression contributed to a growing picture of a household steeped in both affection and underlying mistrust. Before departing, Miss Marple offered courteous nods and gentle smiles to each family member, her mind already piecing together the disparate clues that hinted at hidden resentments and possible motives. It was clear to her that the Henshaw home was not merely a setting for sorrow, but a labyrinth of carefully guarded secrets, secrets that could, in time, unravel the true circumstances behind Lydia's tragic death. With one last lingering glance at the drawing room, a room that held both beauty and burden, Miss Marple stepped back into the cool evening air The house, with its elegant veneer and the echoes of whispered confessions, had left her with as many questions as answers. Yet she was determined to probe deeper. For in the intricate web of family ties and veiled emotions lay the path to uncovering the truth behind Lydia's mysterious end, and Miss Marple was resolved to follow that path until every hidden secret was brought into the light. Chapter 4. Suspicions Arise. Over the next few days, Miss Marple moved gracefully about the Henshaw household, engaging each member with gentle, unassuming inquiries. The air was thick with an undercurrent of unease, as if every person in the family was guarding a secret behind smiles that were too neat and responses that felt rehearsed. Though the family members expressed sincere grief for Lydia, the accounts they offered were peppered with curious omissions and subtle contradictions, details that set Miss Marple's experienced mind alight with suspicion. Her first conversation was with Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw, the formidable mother-in-law, whose measured dignity and precise manner often masked her true feelings. In the quiet drawing-room adorned with family portraits and time-worn furnishings, Mrs. Henshaw sat with an air of rigid composure. Lydia was blessed with a radiant spirit. She insisted, her tone clipped and formal. Her marriage, a union founded on love, brought hope to our family. Yet as Miss Marple listened, she detected a rehearsed quality in these words, as if they had been carefully chosen to deflect attention from an unsaid truth. There was something about the way Mrs. Henshaw repeatedly emphasized the family's fortune and security that hinted at an underlying preoccupation with financial matters rather than genuine mourning. Next, Miss Marple sought out Mr. Bernard Henshaw, Lydia's husband, and the younger son of the family. In a secluded corner of the house, away from the prying eyes of the other members, Bernard's guarded demeanor became immediately apparent. "We loved each other very much," he murmured, when questioned about Lydia's untimely end. "I cannot fathom why she would take such a drastic step." His voice wavered slightly as if betraying the weight of unspoken regrets. Yet there was an odd fixation on the subject of money that crept into his remarks. When Miss Marple delicately probed his recollections of Lydia's final days, Bernard's eyes flickered with an expression of unease before quickly settling back into a mask of sorrow. It was as though he were reluctant to allow any discussion of finances, a topic that Miss Marple noted seemed to carry a different kind of significance for him. In contrast to these measured responses, Mrs. Elaine Henshaw, the wife of Mr. Alan Henshaw, presented a facade of easy nonchalance. In a bright, sunlit room near the conservatory, Elaine offered a gentle, almost dismissive smile when the subject of Lydia's death arose. "It is all very difficult to comprehend," she said lightly, though her tone lacked the warmth one might expect from a person so intimately linked to the family tragedy. There was an air of detachment about her, as if the painful reality of the loss had been tempered by a premeditated decision to remain aloof. Her responses, though polite, seemed designed to steer the conversation away from any contentious or revealing details, leaving Miss Marple to wonder whether such ease was natural or the product of careful concealment. Throughout these interactions, one element surfaced repeatedly, tying together the disparate accounts: the subject of money. Whether it was Mrs. Henshaw's insistence on Lydia's good fortune, Bernard's nervous hints at financial strains, or even Alan's infrequent yet telling silences whenever wealth was mentioned, the theme of monetary gain loomed large over every conversation. In hushed tones and fleeting glances, it became evident that the question of wealth and its potential misuse was not merely background chatter, but perhaps a crucial piece of the puzzle. Another thread that tugged at Miss Marple's attention was the matter of Lydia's missing jewellery. This detail, though mentioned only in passing by several of the family members, struck her as significant. The precious heirlooms that had once belonged to Lydia were conspicuously absent, a fact that no one in the household seemed willing to discuss openly. Each mention of the lost jewels carried with it an unspoken implication, a suggestion that they might have been part of a larger scheme or that their disappearance was connected in some way to the events that had led to Lydia's death. By the time the late afternoon light cast long shadows along the corridors of the Henshaw home, Miss Marple had compiled a mental ledger of all the discrepancies, hesitations, and red herrings that the family's account presented. It was clear to her that beneath the calm surface of sorrow lay a web of ulterior motives, one in which the missing jewelry and the repeated allusions to money might hold the key to unraveling the true nature of Lydia's demise. With quiet determination and a resolve born of years of unraveling human intricacies, Miss Marple prepared to delve even deeper into this tangled web. Every conversation, every carefully measured reply, and every evasive glance had added another brushstroke to the portrait of a household steeped in secrets. And though the family insisted on their love for Lydia, the inconsistencies in their stories whispered a different truth, one that promised to reveal far more than mere tragedy. Chapter 5. Clues in the Garden and the Lost Jewels. Miss Marple stepped out into the garden of the Henshaw estate, with the measured gait of one who has long learned that nature often holds the quietest of revelations. The garden, a symphony of colors and shapes, was at first glance an oasis of calm. Neatly trimmed hedges, bursts of rose and lavender, and the gentle hum of nature going about its business. Yet beneath the surface of this manicured beauty lay an undercurrent of tension, a subtle dissonance that resonated with the discord in the Henshaw household. As she walked along the gravel path, the interplay of sunlight and shadow danced upon the carefully laid stones. Each step Miss Marple took was accompanied by a quiet contemplation of the conversations she had had within the drawing-room. There was talk, half-heard hints of envy, whispered confessions of financial worry, and the recurring, almost evasive, mention of Lydia's missing jewels. To Miss Marple, these details were not trivial. Rather, they were the first clues in a mystery that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the family's facade. Before long, she reached a secluded area of the garden where an ancient oak tree stood as a silent sentinel over the estate. There, tending to a patch of vibrant marigolds, was Tom, the long-serving gardener whose quiet diligence had always been a source of subtle wisdom. His hands, roughened by years of labor, moved with a practiced ease as he pruned a wayward branch. Miss Marple greeted him with a warm, respectful nod, and soon enough a conversation began in low, conspiratorial tones. Miss Marple, Tom started, glancing around as if to ensure that no one could overhear their exchange. "I have long noticed that things here are not quite as they appear. Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw, for instance, has always had an eye for matters that concern money and legacy. Ever since Lydia's untimely passing, there has been an added strain in the air, a preoccupation with wealth that is palpable in every gesture and glance." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly as she listened. "And what of Lydia's jewels?" she inquired softly, her tone conveying both curiosity and gentle urgency. Tom hesitated, his gaze falling to the worn soil at his feet, before he continued. "It has not escaped my notice that several of the jewels Lydia cherished have gone missing since that dreadful day. In a house where every piece of wealth is so dearly guarded, the disappearance of these treasures is hardly coincidental. They were more than mere adornments. They were symbols of the family's affluence, and perhaps even of their greed." The words struck a chord in Miss Marple's mind. As she mulled over Tom's observations, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The family's casual discussions of finances, the furtive glances when the topic of the jewels arose, and the deliberate avoidance of discussing their whereabouts now formed a coherent picture of concealed motives and secret ambitions. "Do you think," Miss Marple pressed gently, "that the jewels might have been taken deliberately as part of a larger scheme to divert suspicion or to secure a personal gain?" Tom's eyes, full of earnest simplicity, met hers with an unspoken acknowledgement. He said slowly, "I believe that in a household where wealth is both a blessing and a curse, the desire to possess what is not rightfully one's own can drive even the kindest souls to treachery." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. The garden, with its hidden corners and rustling leaves, had become an unexpected repository of secrets. The meticulous care with which the estate was maintained seemed at odds with the chaos of human desire that lurked behind closed doors. Every rose and every carefully pruned bush whispered of beauty, yet also of neglect, a neglect born, not of inattention, but of a willful blindness to the darker impulses that had taken root among the family members. With the gardener's candid insights echoing in her ears, Miss Marple strolled slowly along a winding path, bordered by fragrant jasmine and wild thyme. In the interplay of natural splendor and cultivated order, she saw a mirror of the Henshaw household. On the surface, everything appeared impeccable, yet beneath lay an intricate web of deceit, envy, and hidden ambition. The missing jewels, once treasured heirlooms, now seemed to represent not only a tangible loss but also the erosion of trust and the insidious power of greed. As twilight began to settle over the estate, casting long contemplative shadows across the lawn, Miss Marple paused by a small fountain. The water's gentle murmur provided a soothing counterpoint to the relentless questions that swirled in her mind. Who had taken the jewels? What dark design could have compelled someone to betray family bonds for mere material gain? The evidence gathered in the garden and Tom's unvarnished observations were threads in a much larger tapestry of betrayal. Thus, as darkness settled over the estate, Miss Marple's mind churned with the possibilities. In the silent sanctuary of the garden, among the rustle of leaves and the soft whispers of the wind, lay the first solid clues in a case that was anything but straightforward. With a determined heart and a mind sharpened by years of unraveling secrets, she vowed to return and continue piecing together the hidden puzzle of the Henshaw family, a puzzle where every clue, no matter how small, was a step closer to the truth. Chapter 6. The Truth Unveiled on the Body. Miss Marple's investigation led her next to the quiet room where Lydia's lifeless form had been discovered. The chamber, once a space of gentle repose, now seemed transformed into a silent testament of hidden violence. Soft daylight filtered through a narrow window, casting long, somber shadows upon the polished wooden floor. Though the scene had been set up to resemble a calm, sorrowful suicide, Miss Marple's keen eyes quickly discerned that appearances were deliberately misleading. The body of Lydia was suspended in a manner that suggested careful staging, a meticulous effort to portray a picture of self-inflicted despair. However, as Miss Marple drew closer, subtle details betrayed a far different story. With slow, deliberate steps, she approached the figure, her gaze fixed on the small, yet telling, signs that the official narrative of suicide was nothing more than an artful deception. Crouching beside the body, Miss Marple first examined Lydia's arms. There, faint but unmistakable scars marred her skin. Scars that spoke not of a peaceful end, but of a desperate struggle. The marks were arranged in a pattern that suggested the victim had not succumbed quietly to despair, but had instead fought fiercely against an unseen assailant. Each bruise and abrasion hinted at a violent encounter, evidence that Lydia had resisted until her final moments. Even more compelling was what Miss Marple observed at Lydia's hands. A careful inspection of her nails revealed traces of blood, tiny, almost imperceptible flecks that had clung stubbornly to the keratin. The pattern of these stains was not random. It told a story of frantic, desperate resistance. It appeared that in her final moments, Lydia had clawed and fought back, leaving behind a silent record of her struggle. In a case of genuine self-harm, such evidence of a physical fight would be unlikely. Instead, it was a grim indication that the body had been manipulated after a violent encounter, the scene arranged to misdirect any inquiry. Miss Marple's trained eyes continued to survey the surroundings. The way in which Lydia's body had been hung struck her as too deliberate. A person in the throes of despair would not have been capable of such a measured display. The careful arrangement suggested that someone else had taken the time to stage the scene meticulously. Every detail, from the exact placement of the body to the positioning of personal effects, was designed to evoke a narrative of voluntary self-destruction. Yet, in the quiet interplay of light and shadow, the true story was revealed through the physical evidence left on Lydia's limbs. A gentle, cool breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of the garden outside, a stark contrast to the chilling atmosphere of the room. This natural intrusion served as a poignant reminder that while nature moved in its eternal cycle, human cruelty had, in this instance, disrupted that harmony. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the implications of the evidence before her. The scars, the blood on the nails, and the overly contrived setting all pointed unequivocally to murder. Lydia's final act had not been one of despair, but of defiance, an act in which she fought for her life, however fleetingly, before succumbing to the violence inflicted upon her. As she rose from her crouch, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The evidence that lay so bare was more than enough to dismantle the narrative of suicide. In that silent room, every mark on Lydia's body was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that was slowly coming together. The deliberate arrangement of the body was, in itself, a betrayal. It was as though the murderer, in a misguided attempt to protect themselves, had tried to cloak the truth in the veneer of a self-inflicted death. Yet the brutality of the struggle was impossible to conceal. The gravity of the situation weighed on Miss Marple's heart. The quiet dignity of the room had been shattered by an act of violence, and the meticulous staging was a cruel mockery of the truth. In that space, where every shadow and every bruise narrated a tale of struggle and loss, the evidence demanded justice. Lydia had been silenced by a ruthless hand, and the carefully arranged facade was an insult to the life that had once been so full of promise. Taking one last, lingering look at the scene, Miss Marple rose slowly, the resolve in her heart as firm as ever. Every detail, every small clue recorded in her mind was a step closer to unraveling the mystery. As she left the room, the silent testimony of Lydia's final moments remained etched in her thoughts, a poignant reminder that beneath every carefully constructed story lay a truth waiting to be revealed. Chapter 7. Gathering the Suspect. In the soft glow of an overcast afternoon, Miss Marple resolved that it was time to bring all the Henshaw family members together for a final reckoning. The spacious drawing-room of the Henshaw estate, with its high ceilings and rows of ancestral portraits, was filled with a tense hush as each person assumed their place. Today the air felt charged with the weight of unspoken truths, and every member of the family could sense that the time for evasions was drawing to an end. Gathered in the room were Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw, the imperious mother-in-law whose every word had been carefully chosen, Mr. Bernard Henshaw, Lydia's gentle husband, and the younger son, whose anxious glances betrayed inner turmoil, and Mrs. Elaine Henshaw, Alan's wife, whose cool detachment did little to hide her subtle unease. Notably absent, until now, had been Mr. Alan Henshaw, the elder son and nominal out-of-towner. Yet by Miss Marple's invitation he had arrived, a fact that had already begun to unsettle the delicate equilibrium of the household. Miss Marple, seated comfortably in an armchair that faced the assembled group, regarded them all with a calm but penetrating gaze. "I have listened carefully to your accounts," she began, her tone both gentle and insistent. "Each one of you holds a deep affection for Lydia. Yet there are many discrepancies in your stories, especially when it comes to matters of money and trust." A murmur of acknowledgement swept through the room, but the tension only deepened. Turning her keen attention to Mr. Alan Henshaw, Miss Marple continued, "Mr. Henshaw, you claim that you work out of town and were not present on the day in question, yet I have discovered evidence to the contrary." The silence that followed was palpable, every eye now fixed on Alan. His face betrayed a flicker of anxiety as he tried to maintain his composure. "I assure you," he stammered, "I was away, as I have been for many years. I could not have been involved in such a tragedy." Miss Marple's eyes, however, were unwavering. "It appears that the railway station records tell a different story," she said softly. "I learned that you arrived that very day, and then left again without so much as a word to anyone." The room grew colder as the implications of her statement sank in. The elder son, who had long maintained a distant and untroubled facade, now looked increasingly cornered. "Would you be so kind as to remove your shirt?" Miss Marple requested calmly. "There is something that I must examine." Reluctantly and with a visible shudder, Alan complied. As his shirt was removed, Miss Marple's eyes quickly fell upon the faint scars adorning his chest. These were no old, accidental marks, but recent wounds, mirroring the injuries I observed on Lydia's body. She thought silently. Alan's face flushed with a mixture of shame and resignation. The evidence before the assembled family was damning, and in that charged moment his carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. The room was silent save for the sound of his labored breathing. And then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke. "It is true," he confessed in a voice that trembled with regret. "I did return that day. I intended to surprise the family. I had not meant for any harm to come." The admission hung in the air, and Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze gentle but unyielding. "Then tell us, Mr. Henshaw, why did you kill Lydia?" she asked, each word deliberate and clear. Alan's eyes darted about the room before settling on the portrait of Lydia that hung on the wall. "I came home that day, expecting nothing more than to share in the family's joy. But through the window I witnessed something I could hardly believe, a scene that stirred a terrible greed within me." He paused, his voice cracking under the weight of his confession. "I saw my younger brother's wife, Lydia, was setting her jewelry. In that moment, my heart was overcome by a dark impulse. I lost control, and in a fit of greedful passion I attacked her. I tried to make it appear as if she had taken her own life." A shocked gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw's face tightened as she stared at her son, while Bernard looked away, his eyes filling with unshed tears. Mrs. Elaine Henshaw maintained a rigid expression, though the tension in her hands was unmistakable. Miss Marple continued in a measured tone. "It is a grievous act, Mr. Henshaw, and one that not only claims a precious life, but destroys the very trust that binds a family together. Greed, when left unchecked, can twist even the most respectable of hearts into instruments of betrayal." Alan bowed his head in remorse. "I only wish I could take it back," he murmured, voice thick with regret. "I acted out of a moment of uncontrolled emotion, driven by the lure of money and the fear of losing what I thought was mine. I never intended to cause such pain, yet here we are, with the truth laid bare. As the weight of his words settled, Miss Marple's calm presence seemed to console the room, even as the stark reality of the situation pressed down on each member of the family. She knew that in a household as complex as the Henshaws, many emotions and secrets lay intertwined, but the clarity of this confession left no room for doubt. At that moment, the local constabulary, quietly alerted by Miss Marple's earlier observations, arrived to take Alan into custody. As he was led away, his eyes met those of the grieving family. A silent acknowledgement of the irreversible damage his actions had wrought. With the gathering dispersed and the immediate crisis resolved, Miss Marple remained seated, pondering the tragic unraveling of events. In her gentle, unassuming manner, she had once again exposed the darkness hidden beneath a veneer of respectability, proving that even the most closely guarded secrets eventually come to light. Chapter 8. The Confession and Final Resolution. In the quiet aftermath of the confession, the Henshaw household lay shrouded in a heavy, reflective silence. The charged atmosphere of the drawing room had given way to a somber calm as each family member began to reckon with the devastation wrought by Alan's admission. Outside, dusk had settled over the estate, the fading light reflecting the muted emotions within. Miss Marple, ever the calm arbiter of truth, observed the scene with a mixture of melancholy and resolute satisfaction that justice, however delayed, had been served. The local constabulary had escorted Alan away, his shoulders bowed under the weight of remorse and shame. As he disappeared down the long drive, the remaining family members sat in quiet disarray. Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw's stern features had softened into an expression of regret, as though the rigid control she had so carefully maintained was now crumbling beneath the pressure of undeniable truth. Mr. Bernard Henshaw, Lydia's grieving husband, appeared lost in thought, his eyes searching the room for signs that might offer an explanation for the chaos that had upended his life. Even Mrs. Elaine Henshaw, who had maintained a veneer of cool detachment, now looked inwardly pained, her hands trembling ever so slightly, as if to ward off the recollection of what had transpired. Miss Marple rose from her seat, her gentle eyes scanning the faces before her. In her measured, unhurried manner, she began to recount the details that had pieced together the mystery. It was not a mind overcome by despair, as some might hastily conclude, she said softly, her voice resonating with quiet authority. Lydia fought until her final moments. Her scars and the blood on her nails testified to a struggle that was fierce and unyielding. It was clear that she was not the architect of her own demise. She paused to let her words sink in, then continued. And it was no accident that the jewels which belonged to her, heirlooms that had long been cherished by this family, had vanished. Their disappearance was part of a broader tapestry of greed and betrayal that had infiltrated this household. Miss Marple's eyes drifted towards the assembled family, as if to include each of them in her sweeping observation. Greed, when left to fester, can twist even the most respected hearts into instruments of tragedy. Here, the lust for wealth and the desire to secure a legacy had pushed one man to commit an act that can never be undone. As she spoke, Miss Marple recalled the furtive glances, the evasive answers, and the subtle hints that had emerged during her investigations. Every conversation, whether in the drawing room or in the quiet corners of the estate, had provided her with clues that, when assembled, revealed a story of concealed motives and unspoken resentments. The truth, she explained, was not buried in the official records alone, but was inscribed in the very scars on Lydia's body and the desperate actions of a man who had lost control to the lure of money. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the room. Mrs. Beatrice Henshaw, whose earlier rigidity had masked her own inner conflicts, nodded slowly. "I always feared that our family's preoccupation with wealth might one day bring ruin," she admitted, her voice thick with remorse. "I hoped that Lydia's marriage would bring happiness, not discord. But it seems that even in love the spectre of greed can loom large." Mr. Bernard Henshaw, his eyes now brimming with a mixture of sorrow and understanding, added quietly, "I trusted that our bonds would be strong enough to shield us from such treachery. Instead, we have all suffered immeasurably." The gravity of the situation had drawn out the hidden vulnerabilities of the family, and even Mrs. Elaine Henshaw, who had earlier seemed so detached, appeared touched by the raw truth of the confession. Miss Marple continued, "In every family there are secrets, and often those secrets are wrapped in the guise of loyalty and love. Yet when money and inheritance become the focal points of one's desires, the result can be a tragedy far worse than any that can be justified by the mere pursuit of wealth." Her words were gentle, but they carried the weight of her lifelong experience in understanding the human heart. "I trust that you will, in time, come to see that Lydia's death was not the result of despair, but the consequence of a moment of uncontrolled passion, a moment in which one man allowed his baser instincts to override the bonds of kinship." As twilight deepened into night, Miss Marple bid the family farewell, leaving them with her final counsel. "Let this be a lesson," she said softly, "that beneath the surface of respectability there may lie a network of secrets and hidden ambitions. But truth, no matter how carefully veiled, has a way of emerging. In your grief, seek not only solace but also the wisdom to rebuild trust where it has been so grievously broken." With that, Miss Marple walked away from the estate, her silhouette merging with the darkening landscape. She carried with her the quiet satisfaction of having restored order and justice, even as she lamented the irreparable loss of a kind soul. The echoes of the day's revelations would linger long in the minds of the Henshaw family, a somber reminder of how greed and unchecked ambition can shatter even the most cherished bonds. In the cool silence of the night, as the stars emerged one by one in the vast starlit sky, the mystery was finally resolved. Lydia's memory would live on not as a victim of despair, but as a beacon of truth in a family that had lost its way. And Miss Marple, with her unerring insight into the human condition, knew that while justice had been served, the path to healing was a long and arduous one that would require the survivors to confront not only the loss of a beloved sister and wife, but also the deeper fractures that had allowed such a tragedy to unfold.